Hey girls and gals, welcome back to my channel. My name is Taylor and this video is going to be my Stephen King TBR. Now this isn't necessarily like a TBR for this month or next month or even 2021 in general. This is just kind of a general priority list of, I kind of tried to pick the top 10 Stephen King books that I haven't read yet, or there's some rereads, we'll get into those in a minute, but books that I just really wanted to prioritize. Stephen King is one of my favorite authors, and liking him, being a constant reader, I feel like is a trip, right? Because you feel like you've read so much, or at least for me, you feel like you've read so much of his work, and then you look at a complete list of his works and you're like, oh, I haven't even scratched the surface yet. Like, I have read in the double digits of his books, and yet I still managed to easily find 10 books that I hadn't read yet. That's just how extensive his backlog is. He's got about, at the time that I'm filming this, I think 74 books out, 75th book coming out this summer, I think somewhere around there. So I figured I would make this video just to kind of sit down and talk about the 10 Stephen King books that I have on my TBR as like a priority TBR that I would like to get to sooner rather than later. Now I did split this video up into 3 different categories. So we have books that I really want to reread because it has been a while. We have books that I want to prioritize for either personal reasons or just because there's like an adaptation or something like that coming out and I want to read the book before the movie because, you know, the book is always better sometimes. And then also some very classic bread and butter Stephen King staples that I feel like I should read sooner rather than later, because there are definitely some iconic ones on this list that I have not read yet. So without further ado, let's just go ahead and get started. The first category on this TBR is books that I have read before and that I really want to reread. So the first book we're going to talk about is Rose Madder, and this was actually my very first Stephen King book that I ever read. I know, very random pick for my first Stephen King. Let me know down below what your first Stephen King book has, or if you've never read anything by him, what book that you want to be your first by him. But this is the first book that I've ever read by Stephen King. I read this because at the time I did not have the means to buy books, so I was primarily operating through my library. And obviously for libraries, if you're just gonna go there and grab books off the shelf, they're not gonna have the big heavy hitters there, and I wanted to try a Stephen King, and for whatever reason this title just called to me. I picked it up, I read it, I really loved it, and the rest is history. But that being said, it has been a while since I picked this up, and every time I see someone mention this book, whether or not they love it or hate it, they'll mention some details about why they loved it so much or why they hated it so much, and every time I see that, I'm like, okay, I remember a lot about this, but clearly not enough, because there's a lot of aspects about this book that I just genuinely don't remember, or like don't remember well enough. So I definitely want to pick this up and give it a reread. Another fun little anecdote about this one is that it came out in 1995 and I was born in 95. So yeah, fun little connection there. And I'm also not going to be giving a lot of synopsises about these books. It's just kind of a general TBR overview of the ones that I'd like to pick up. Next book that I would like to pick up and do a reread would be 11/22/63. This is one that I again read very early on in my Stephen King journey, and I remember really loving this book, but I also know there are a lot of Easter eggs in here that I definitely didn't notice because this was one of my first Stephen King books that I read, so I think it would be really fun to dive into this again, reread it, catch those things that I hadn't picked up on before, and then also see if I liked it as much. I always say this is one of my favorite Stephen King books, but I did read it at a time where my taste in books, I feel like, has changed so much from, I think I read this late high school, early college. My reading taste has changed so much since then, so I'll be interested to see upon a reread like how I feel about this and if my overall feelings about it remain the same. Moving on to the next set of books on my TBR. These are books that I either just kind of want to pick up on a whim, or they're books that have an adaptation either out or are coming out really soon that I want to read the book before the movie or TV show or what have you. So the first book in this category is going to be Revival. Now this book is actually fairly short short when it comes to Stephen King books, especially ones that came out around this time period that this one came out in. I've been putting off reading this one because number one, I heard you should probably read Frankenstein first, and I finally did either late last year or early this year. I finally did that, so I feel like I'll have some context behind this. And then also there is an adaptation coming out from the same people who did The Haunting of Hill House, and that is one of my favorite pieces of film ever. And so this is definitely an adaptation that I will want to watch very soon after it comes out. I am generally like not a big TV or movie person, but I have a feeling that the adaptation of this is going to be really good, so I just want to make sure that I read the book before it comes out. Next up in this category, we have Finders Keepers, the second book in the Mr. Mercedes trilogy, and this one I want to prioritize because I have heard really great things about the TV series adaptation of Mr. Mercedes. Mr. Mercedes, the book, is not one of my favorite Stephen Kings. It's definitely one of my least favorite Stephen Kings, and I debated even continuing on with the series, but I have heard from a ton of people that it does get better, or just that the second and third books are a very different vibe from the first book. So I am going to try and give this second book a try, and honestly, I don't know what it is about this, but this is one of my favorite Stephen King covers. It's just very simplistic, very fun. I mean, I say fun, but you know, for a horror fan. But yeah, I know I've slandered Mr. Mercedes a lot in the past just because it just didn't work for me, but I do know a lot of people that I have very similar reading taste to really love this series, and I think they've really enjoyed the second and third a lot more than the first, so we'll see. Next up on my list is another book that is getting an adaptation soon, and this was more recently announced, so I don't know when this adaptation will come out or if it will come out in the near future, so I might have plenty of time to read this one, but that is going to be Lissy's Story. I feel like I have to do the obligatory cover reveal for this because at first glance it's very plain, and then of course the naked hardback is gorgeous, but I would like to read this one. I've wanted to pick it up for a while because number one, I feel like people who tend to enjoy 11/22/63 also really like this one, and of course I could be wrong. Like, what if I reread 11/22/63 and hate it? I don't think I will, but if I do, then I don't know about this one. But I want to pick this up, read it before the adaptation, and on this whole list, if I had to pick one, I would say either this book or the next book coming up are the ones that I know the absolute least about, so I have no idea what an adaptation of this would even be about. So yeah, looking forward to picking this one up as well. And then the final book in this category is going to be Duma Key. This is one that I want to prioritize mainly because, again, I feel like a lot of people who enjoyed 11/22/63 also really enjoyed this one, so I have a feeling, again, if I end up still really loving 11/22/63, I'll end up really liking this one as well. And I know next to nothing about it, and I'm gonna be honest, that's always, I feel like, very fun going into a Stephen King book not knowing a lot about it, because his work, a lot of it's so iconic. Like if you pick up The Shining, I feel like even if you've never read The Shining, you kind of have an idea of what you're gonna find in there, but something like this, I really don't know what to expect, so I think that's part of the allure in picking it up. And now moving on to the final category, we have the ones where I feel like everyone has read, except for me, very, very popular Stephen King books that I haven't read yet. So starting this off on a very strong note, Different Seasons by Stephen King. This is the short story collection with some very iconic works in it. I will say I have read The Shawshank Redemption, and I've also read Apt Pupil from this collection. I just haven't read the other two, so I want to get around to this one eventually. I'm hoping to find a copy soon. And I also read the two of those a long time ago. It was a library hold, which is why I only read two of the stories in there, so I'm looking forward to picking this one up soon and just reading it in its entirety. I am not a big short story person. I know a lot of people think that this is Stephen King's best short story collection, so yeah, we will have to see. Next up on this list is going to be Needful Things, and this is one I have actually started a number of times via audiobook and just never really gotten into it, even though it's read by Stephen King. I actually don't know like how how iconic this one is. I feel like it's one I always think of when I think of Stephen King for whatever reason, and I kind of do know the story behind it and a lot of what happens, so maybe that's why I haven't prioritized picking it up until now, but I do want to read this audiobook. I believe Stephen King narrates at least a version of this audiobook, so I'd like to try and find that format, do kind of like a reading along while listening to it. I have noticed I generally tend to either really love or not care for so much the Castle Rock themed stories, or like the ones that have Castle Rock as the location, so we'll have to see how I feel about this one. The premise does sound really intriguing though, and I have a feeling it is one, just based on the themes and based on other books that I've liked with similar themes, I think, to this one, that I will really enjoy it. Next up on my list we have Christine, and this is one where I feel like this is a book I probably wouldn't have picked up if Stephen King hadn't have written it. It's about a car named Christine. I feel like I know the general bare bones of the plot of this one, as well as I feel like this is also one that's in like the general lexicon of people's knowledge about King. I don't know. This could either be like a hidden gem for me, because honestly, I'm not a big car person, and I never would expect to like a book primarily focused on like a love of vintage cars. However, one of my favorite Joe Hill books is Nosferatu, and I really enjoyed that, and there's a really big car element in there with like a magical sinister car, so who knows, I might really enjoy this. This is definitely one that I'm very intrigued to read and see where I fall and how I feel about it. And then last but certainly not least on this TBR is going to be the Bachman books by Richard Bachman / Stephen King. Now this is kind of an infamous collection of short stories because it does have Rage in it, which is about a school shooter, which I am actually not looking forward to reading. I am, but I'm not. You can't actually buy like a new copy of this bind up anymore because King actually made the decision to pull that short story from print. But other than that, this also does have The Long Walk, Roadwork, and The Running Man, and I feel like especially The Long Walk and The Running Man are some of his most iconic. I feel like both of those are very popular, if not book, but just adaptations of these short stories. So I'm definitely, I don't know if I'm looking forward to reading at least Rage. I'm very nervous about reading that one. I have heard not so great things by a lot of people who have similar reading taste to me, but I do really want to pick this one up. There are lots of works in here that I feel like I kind of know the bare bones of the story, but obviously I haven't read it. And just looking on the back, actually The Running Man is set in the year 2025, so I always love a good dystopian that was written a long time ago that like we're coming up to that year or we've already passed that year. It's just kind of fun, I guess, in a way. So yes, this is another one that I'm looking forward to reading sooner rather than later. But there you have it. That is my Stephen King priority TBR. Let me know down below which one I should pick up first, which one that you would pick up first, which one of these was your favorite. If you liked this video, don't forget to give it a thumbs up, subscribe for more content from me. Stay safe, stay spooky, and I'll see y'all in the next one. Bye!